Welcome to The Check-In, a podcast by Telos where we explore the headlines from Israel-Palestine and across the world, wading into the complexity of seemingly intractable conflict to discover the power of peacemaking to help heal us, our community, and our world. I'm Todd Deatherage. I'm stepping in for our erstwhile host, David Catabaugh, who's on some much-needed vacation today, and I am checking in from my home in Annandale, Virginia. On today's episode, we're discussing an invitation for you, for your church, for your faith community or university. On October 6th, we're calling on all Christian leaders and communities to join us and our friends in centering mutual flourishing. We're inviting you to join the Global Sunday of Mutual Flourishing. After almost an entire year of witness and reflection, the time is now to speak with a collective voice for the sake of peace. On October 6th, we're asking you to use your platforms, your pulpits, your prayers and your liturgies, your voices and your instruments to honor the victims of all this violence, to lament the indignity, and to plant the seeds of peace and mutuality. And to have this conversation today, we've invited Mike Goldsworthy, a Telos alum who sparked the idea for the Global Sunday of Mutual Flourishing. And we've asked Mike to come in and share more about this initiative and why the moment is now for Christian ministers to speak up. Mike is a good friend who I've enjoyed getting to know from the first time we met in Jerusalem on a trip to Israel-Palestine. And so really happy to have you here. Mike, where are you checking in from?
Hey, Todd, what a gift to get to be with you here. I am at my home in Long Beach, California, about as far across the U.S. as I can get from you, apparently.
We are separated by a continent, but it's through the magic of this technology, we're here together to have this conversation today. Thank you. Why don't you start by telling us tell our listeners a little bit more about who you are?
Yeah, so I am a pastor by trade, I guess you could say, that I was pastoring a church that I had been on staff at for 19 years, and I led it for 11 years out here in Long Beach, California. And that's where we met, was through the work I was doing at the church and getting to partner with you all while I was there. And now a part of what I do is I get to work with churches across the country and pastors across the country, many of which who are trying to find ways forward that look like a lot of the kind of principles that we have learned from Telos. And so, yeah, I'm so grateful for the gift that you all have been to me and to the church at large.
Thanks, Mike. You've been a gift to us. Well, let's talk about this idea of a global Sunday for mutual flourishing. Can you give us a little bit about where this idea came from, what prompted it, and just how it came about?
Yeah, for sure. So I was with a group of Christian leaders out in DC in June of this year, where we gathered together with a bunch of Telos folks and Reverend Dr. Munter Isaac. And one of the things that Dr. Isaac said, that I think he said in several contexts, but it just really hit me sitting in that room with him there, where I heard him say that the silence of the Church of the West is incredibly loud. That with all that's happening, that a lot of us don't know what to say, don't know how to say it, don't want to say the wrong kind of thing, and that the result has been that we haven't said anything, and we have left our Palestinian siblings feeling like we don't care, and we've left them hanging. And we began to talk about what does it look like for us to engage better, to take some next steps. And we began having some discussions about what are some like short-term strategies, what are some long-term strategies that we can do to help the church step into caring about mutual flourishing in this particular moment really well.
Yeah, I was there when Munter said that, and it was a hard word to hear, right? But it was so powerful and so, I think motivating for a lot of people to want to respond to that. For those who don't know, Munter is the pastor of the Lutheran Church in Bethlehem. So he's a Palestinian Christian in the little town of Bethlehem, and he has been one of the most poignant and profound voices coming out of the Holy Land during this whole time, as he has been really crying out for people to be responsive to the Palestinian suffering, to what's going on. And he definitely has heard some Christians. That's been one of the challenges, right? There are many Christians who have not been afraid or ashamed to speak in this moment, and they've spoken loudly about their support for what's happening in Gaza, this But what he's wanted to hear are those who would call for something different. And I think it was out of that desire that some of us gathered in DC in June, and this whole idea came about. And so thank you, Mike, for really taking the initiative to try to make something happen around this.
That like really struck me as a white Christian pastor. I've often thought, like, what would I have done when Martin Luther King Jr. was around? Would I have marched with him? Right? We all know about like what had happened of his high disapproval ratings in the United States at the time when he was actually alive. And like I've had to have some hard like personal convictions around that. It really seems to me that Reverend Dr. Munter Isaac, in a lot of ways, is the equivalent of a MLK for the Palestinian people. And so there's a constant question of me of like, if I would have wanted to have been somebody who acted then, what does it look like to be somebody who acts now?
Wow, that's really profound. I think about that because so often in Telos, one of our programs is to take people on these journeys here in the United States that help us understand our own story more honestly. And we have this trip in the American South we call Restory Us. And we always go to Selma on those trips. And when you go to Selma, part of that story is the way in which Dr. King issued this call for people to respond to and come join. And you saw in the Voting Rights March of 1965, you saw people coming from across America. You saw, very famously, like the Jewish rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel was there to march. You had Orthodox clergy. You had ministers from all around the country. One of the more gripping stories is a housewife from Detroit, a young Catholic mother of, I think, 4 or 5 children, who was so taken by Dr. King's call that she got in her car and she drove to Selma. Her name is Viola Luzo, and she ended up giving her life. She was murdered by the Klan while she was there. But so many people responded to that call. And so what you said just really struck something deep in me, because I've often been struck by what it would have been like to have lived in that moment, to hear Dr. King's call, and to how I might have responded. So thanks for sharing that. So I think one of the things I think will be helpful for our listeners to understand is what we're really calling people to in this time of, the Sunday of mutual flourishing. For the work we've done at Telos for 15 years now has been to help Americans better understand the reality in Israel-Palestine, and to reorient our interventions and our resources and the ways that we care away from very zero-sum kinds of ideas and activism and things that keep us trapped, and more toward a more just reality where everyone lives together with dignity, security, freedom in equal measure, Israelis and Palestinians. And whatever political arrangement that looks like, we are mostly agnostic on that. But the idea is that everyone should have the ability to flourish in the same way. No hierarchies, no systems of control, and without all the kinds of violence that we have seen. And we have called this vision mutual flourishing, the idea of mutuality. And it's really rooted in a Christian understanding of the original design for what God had in mind for the creation order, where the shalom of God, where men and women were to live in right relationship with God and each other and the created natural world, and flourishing in justice and peace. And that notion of that interconnectedness of all reality, in the relationship between all of reality, and that and wholeness and unity is God's desire and design, and that is what God is really about the business of doing and bringing into fullness. And I think that is a very common understanding of reading of Christian scripture and understanding of theology, although I'm not sure many of us really could articulate that or live, and I don't think most of us live it out very well. But I think that's what this is really rooted in. Can you speak to that at all, Mike, about how you understand mutuality in this context, or how the church could and should embrace this kind of approach in this particular moment that we're in?
Yeah, I mean, I think I love the way that I've heard you talk about it so many times around that my flourishing is intricately tied into your flourishing, and that's true. That's true with my neighbor, my physical neighbor. That's true with the city next door to me. That's true with my Palestinian neighbor and my Israeli neighbor and my global neighbors, and that there is no flourishing for me and for my children without flourishing for them and their children. and that those are all intricately tied to one another. I think that we see, you're right, that story early on in the scriptures. I think that we see it in places like, I think of Jeremiah, who calls the people who have been exiled to seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which they've been carried to, and that in Jeremiah the prophet says that when it prospers, you too will prosper. That there's like this intricate, like tied inness of all of humanity is intricately tied into one another. But my experience, both as a pastor and I don't know if you know this, I actually teach homiletics. I teach preaching at a Christian college for undergraduates. And one of the things that is hardest for new preachers to figure out how to do is how to take an abstract concept and make it concrete. So mutual flourishing is an abstract idea. Theological concepts are like abstract ideas. It needs some sort of way, like, how is this lived out? How does this get concrete? And there's a lot of ways that happens, but one of the particular ways is like, here's what's happening in our world right now. And what does it look like for us to take this really significant theological concept that can stay abstract and we can like read books on and talk about and get all that, but what does it look like to overlay that over the concreteness of actual, real, tangible situation that's happening in our midst right now? And so I think that's some of the work that you all have been doing for a while. And that's some of, I think, what birthed this idea was like, how can we help some communities that haven't known exactly how to talk about this? Because I get it. It's hard to figure out how do you talk about something that people are hearing from 50 different sources about 50 different ways to think about it. And they're all very authoritative in how they're talking about it. And people are coming into your church with all of that sort of stuff. And then for you to get up and share, if you share something that feels like it pushes against those things and you don't have as much information, maybe as what you don't feel prepared to defend, so you just don't say anything. So we wanted to help folks be able to have the resources to put the flesh and blood for word to become flesh, to like help this become a tangible outworking of that really significant concept of mutual flourishing.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah. And I love that challenge of taking an abstract concept like this and making it concrete is right there in front of us. Right. And so, often the way I've seen that done best would be through telling stories, through telling that, like human stories and personal stories of people who have lived this way. And I think, in the Israeli-Palestinian context, one of the things that we've done at Telos for many years is take people on these very unique trip journeys there. And we've introduced them to people who do that. And I think of our friend Roni Kadar, who has lived for many years on the border of the Gaza Strip in a Jewish Israeli community, and she's had a very different voice, even though she has been the victim of a lot of rocket fire and that sort of thing, and her family just barely escaped being murdered on October 7th. But she has still, even since then, and we've met with her, and she's still doubled down on these notions that the things that she wants for herself and her family are not going to be available to them. The life she wants for her, is unless her neighbors have the same thing. And those neighbors happen to be the people of Gaza. And their reality is not going to be, available that they want unless, she and her family has access to the flourishing and the peace that they want. And what that means is not just we all have to just sort of like, let's just all get along and be nice to each other, but we have to reorder the whole system that has bound us up in this very asymmetrical conflict that they're living in. And she's really been a beautiful proponent of working both for the interpersonal relationships necessary and for ending the blockade of the Gaza Strip, by her own government, and issues of occupation and control, and working against violence in all its forms. And that's really beautiful. I think of our own Jack Saba, who has been our program director there in Israel-Palestine for about 9 years. He's on sabbatical right now, but Jack and his wife, Adria, have lived their whole lives in a way where they are both trying to live out the reality that they want to see, the world they want to see, in the way that the relationships they have cultivated and developed, the way that the place they've educated their daughter, in a joint Jewish Arab school, all the different ways that they have lived has been so profound. And they are at the same time, like trying to live out this reality to work for a more fair and just society in which they don't feel like they're second-class citizens as Palestinian citizens in Israel. They work against, the occupation and things like that. And those stories of people doing it there are always definitely so profound. But I know that we have those stories in our own communities too, of people that see that the life they want is connected to the other, that they're alive, that they're implicated. And I also think often of the story of the Good Samaritan, the way in which there were a couple of men who were on their way to Jericho that day, and they could not see that this person on the side of the road, it was someone that they felt they were implicated in. And the Good Samaritan is the guy who actually did see that, who saw that his somehow he was implicated in this man's suffering, and he stopped and becomes the hero of the story that Jesus tells us. And I think there's just so much in that is a way for us all to kind of explain our connectedness, our mutuality. Mike, what does it look like for a pastor or a church to participate in Mutual Flourishing Sunday?
Yeah. So the way that we have been thinking about this is to think of trusting the wisdom of churches, the pastoral wisdom of pastors to know their churches and to know what they need, but out of a common sort of like baseline of what we're calling for is mutual flourishing. So out of that if the vision of what that looks like, if we were to think of like a scale of 1 to 10, the vision of what that looks like fully fleshed out in a community, fully living it as a 10, and the collective sort of consciousness of your church is like a 2 or a 3, well, like what does it look like for your church to go like one click up, to go from a 2 to a 3, a 3 to a 4, a 7 to an 8? And so with that, we've created a slew of resources for churches on October 6th. And we intentionally, obviously, picked October 6th, recognizing it's the day before the 1-year anniversary of the start of the war. That what would it look like for on that day to, in some sort of way, to acknowledge that in your church? And so that might be for some churches, it might look like we're going to carve out a few minutes to have some specific time of prayer that is concretely about what's happening in the Middle East. It might look like we've got a bit of a confession that we've created around our complicity in this. And it's this invitation to engage in the work of mutual flourishing and this recognition of where we've fallen short in that. It might look like we've created a video of multiple voices, including some Palestinian Christians who read that confession. It might look like showing something like that. It might look like, I know some folks are going to have their full worship service oriented around this. And so they're going to preach on it. They're going to have songs that call towards seeing the humanity in others and our role in peacemaking. And so they're going to orient the whole worship service around that. And then some are going to like simply like put something in their bulletin and offer a brief acknowledgement of it. And we trust your pastoral wisdom to know like what's right for your community, to stretch them a bit out of their comfort zone, but to also know that like what will work in one church is not necessarily going to be the right thing to do pastorally in another church. But we do want to encourage you to do some sort of thing to engage in a way that would call people out of their comfort zone a bit towards mutual flourishing.
I think that's such a good idea, Mike, because everybody is at a different place in their, kind of understanding of what's going on there and how they want to respond to every congregation and community is going to be different on this, and giving people a set of options to just lean in, because the sort of voices that are very committed to the zero sum kind of approach don't have that reticence to speak out. But this is a complex issue and it's a divisive issue, and I know a lot of pastors just don't want to they don't want to divide their community. They don't want to be that controversial. They don't want to have to get smart on something that's really complicated. But what we're really asking people to do is to not lean into all the complexity of this particular conflict. And it's to actually lean into what does it mean to be a peacemaker in the world. And when we see the horrific kinds of violence that we've seen emanating out of Israel-Palestine for some generations now, but particularly since October 7th and ongoing right now, it demands some kind of response if we really are a people who believe that the world is not redeemed by violence, but that violence begets violence begets violence, and that there is a different way and a better way and a truer way. And wherever you're at in your engagement, understanding, whatever, there's an entry point here that you're offering. I think that's really such a wise and helpful thing. And I just want to remind people that what we have often said to those who enter into this work of peacemaking is that you have to always kind of, when you go into something really complicated, contentious and complicated and divisive issue, you have to hold together both courage and humility. You have to have some humility to appreciate, yeah, you don't know everything. You don't have all the answers. You can't get, smart on all the details of everything. But you do have to have the courage to act on the things you do know to be true. And when we see what's happening right now in Gaza and in Israel, we know that that's not right. And there are some things that we can at least understand and say and do in a moment like this. And we have to have some courage to do that. And I was doing some prep for some teaching I'm doing on our principles and practices of peacemaking, which is our kind of framework for how to enter into all of this. And I was doing that the other day, and I was just reading through the Sermon on the Mount, and when Jesus is talking about giving this sort of listing of the Beatitudes, maybe there's a logic to the order, because blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God, is immediately followed by the possibility of persecution. Like when you're persecuted, and there is a way in which when you engage in this, you do have to just expect the fact that there will be people who resist it. There are people who don't like it. I always tell young people when they're coming, to DC to take on some kind of job where they want to change the world, I'm like, that is it's a beautiful thing to want to bring change into the world. Just remember, the world's pretty satisfied with the way it is for the most part. And so just be prepared for the fact that there will be resistance to your efforts to bring, healing and change into the world. And that in no way means that we shouldn't do it. It means we have to do it. But at the same time, we have to be appreciative of the fact that this will be resisted. So anybody even who enters into something like this is definitely going to run the possibility that someone's not going to like what we're doing or understanding. And it doesn't absolve us of it all, because it actually just means that we really need to find the best way to do it. And I think this idea of calling people into a Sunday focused on mutuality is such a beautiful, resonant way to do that. So just thanks, Mike, for your leadership and helping to, at this very grassroots level, draw a bunch of folks in. And what can people do if they want to learn more, and how can they kind of join this effort?
Yeah. So we've got a website, mutualflourishing.com. And over there's a place where you can sign up. Yeah. We got that from somewhere. It's weird that it was available.
Well, it demonstrates to you how much this is needed, that it was available.
Apparently. So mutualflourishing.com, we've got a place for folks to sign up there to get on the mailing list for it. We've also got kind of that confession that I mentioned earlier. And then we've also got a page of resources there that we're currently continuing to build, where there are resources for you and your community, whether that is prayers that you could use on a Sunday, songs that you could use in a worship service, sermon examples that you could use to build off of, tools and resources like that hopefully you can use to be able to use your pastoral wisdom to figure out what will work best in your context. Yeah, I mean, I just so appreciate what you were saying a moment ago, Todd, about like peacemaking work does disrupt the status quo.
Yeah.
And so engaging in this at any kind of level will create some disruption in your church if it's not, even if it is a normative thing that you're engaging in your church. The constant move between the binaries to move into a sort of like a more transcendent, for lack of a better term, like way of engaging in things like this will always disrupt those who find themselves in the binaries. And so, yeah, I think it's really important to like remember that even if you're moving folks from a 2 to a 3, there's disruption that's there.
Yep, that's right. That's right. But if you are a Christian who's really serious about your faith and a discipleship journey, it is ever an effort toward greater discomfort and disruption, right? I mean, that's really part of the whole journey.
It is.
And there's joy in that journey. It's, there's pain, but there's real joy in that journey as well. So, well, thanks for being one of those guys, Mike, who has leaned into those tensions and the hard spots, and has really been ever on a journey trying to do that work. I've been really grateful for you and your friendship, and for being partners with you in these good things over the last number of years. So thanks for being with us today. And thanks for just, being willing to step in to help kind of give some leadership to get into this very kind of grassroots movement and idea. And we do hope that many more will join in, share it with your networks, share it with if you are a pastor, please take it up and share it with colleagues and others. If you're a layperson, try to get your church involved. Bring this to the leadership of your church and ask them if they can participate in this too. And we're just grateful for all of you. Thanks for listening today.